They said humanity would never rise above the dust of our own world. The Galactic Council looked at us like children playing with broken toys, too primitive to understand the weight of the cosmos. For 3 generations, we bent our knees, signed their treaties, and watched as they carved up our solar system like a feast we weren't invited to. But beneath the surface of compliance, something ancient stirred in the human heart. Rage, patience, and the kind of ingenuity that turns desperation into legend. My name is Dakota Reeves, and I was there when everything changed. Not as a soldier or a politician, but as an engineer who spent 15 years welding together the impossible in the belly of Mars. The Red Planet wasn't just a colony to us. It was a forge, a cathedral of secrets where humanity built its answer to a galaxy that had forgotten we could bite back. The morning it all began, I was calibrating the neural synchronization matrix of Titan Breaker, one of the 12 war giants humanity had constructed in absolute silence. These machines weren't just metal and circuitry. They were monuments to every slight, every condescending treaty, every time the Council reminded us that Earth was lucky to have a seat at their table. 400 feet of weaponized fury, powered by fusion cores that burned hotter than most stars, piloted by humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I remember running my hand along Titan Breaker's hull that morning, feeling the cold steel that would soon run hot with battle. Beside me stood Gemma Cross, the pilot chosen to merge her consciousness with this mechanical god. She was 28, born on Europa, raised on stories of how the Council's mining regulations had killed her grandfather in a tunnel collapse they deemed acceptable losses. Her eyes held no fear, only a crystalline focus that made my spine tingle. "How does it feel?" I asked her, watching as she prepared for the neural link procedure. Gemma smiled, but it was the kind of smile that could cut through armor plating, like I've been asleep my whole life and I'm finally about to wake up. The Council had no idea what was coming. They had their fleets, their synthetic intelligence networks, their weapons that could glass a planet from orbit, but they had grown soft in their superiority, comfortable in a galaxy where violence was outsourced to drones, and peace was maintained through overwhelming technological advantage. They had forgotten that humanity learned to fight in caves with sharpened stones, that we had climbed from the primordial mud by refusing to die quietly. Our war giants had been built in pieces, scattered across 12 locations throughout the solar system. The Council's surveillance satellites saw mining equipment, terraforming machinery, standard industrial operations. They never imagined that every component was designed to slot together into weapons of unprecedented power. We used their own regulations against them, hiding in plain sight, always one step ahead of their bureaucratic oversight. The signal came at dawn, transmitted simultaneously to all 12 sites. 3 simple words that carried the weight of centuries. Remember, rise, reclaim. Titan Breaker's cockpit sealed around Gemma with a hiss of hydraulics. I watched from the command bunker as her vitals synced with the machine, her heartbeat becoming its pulse, her thoughts translating into movement with terrifying precision. The neural link technology was banned by 17 Council ordinances, considered too dangerous, too unpredictable. They said it would drive pilots insane, that the human mind couldn't handle the feedback. But they never understood that humanity had always excelled at doing the impossible when told it couldn't be done. Across the solar system, 11 other pilots were undergoing the same transformation. Jackson Mercer and Rathborn, emerging from the methane seas of Titan. Yuki Tanaka and Storm Herald, breaking through the ice sheets of Ganymede. Rafael Santos and Void Render, launching from the asteroid belt where his family had mined for 3 generations under Council quotas that kept them perpetually in debt. Each pilot carried their own scars, their own reasons for stepping into machines that might kill them just from the synchronization process alone. But every single one of them had looked at the stars and decided that dying as a weapon was better than living as a slave. The first Council response came exactly 4 minutes after Titan Breaker broke through the Martian surface. A priority transmission from Overseer Designation KL9047, a synthetic intelligence that managed Earth sector operations with the cold efficiency of a calculator, determining acceptable casualty rates. Unidentified terrestrial mechanized unit, you are in violation of Galactic Ordinance 88 Theta. Power down immediately and prepare for containment protocols. This is your only warning. Gemma's voice came through the comm system and I could hear the smile in it, savage and free. Tell your council we have a new ordinance. Leave our system, or learn why humans don't build monuments to peace. The first council patrol ship that moved to intercept Titanbreaker was the CSS Benevolent Authority, a cruiser-class vessel with enough firepower to level a city. It had been stationed above Mars for 8 years, a reminder of who held power in this corner of the galaxy. Gemma walked Titanbreaker forward with steps that registered on seismographs, each footfall a declaration of intent. The Benevolent Authority opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt tungsten. Titanbreaker's shields absorbed the first volley, energy dispersing across electromagnetic barriers that humanity had spent decades perfecting. Then Gemma raised the war giant's right arm, and the railgun mounted there spoke with a voice like thunder splitting the sky. The shot traveled at a fraction of light speed. A tungsten rod accelerated to velocities that made conventional weapons look like thrown rocks. It punched through the Benevolent Authority's shields, through its hull, through its reactor core, and out the other side in less than a second. The ship came apart like a flower blooming in reverse, petals of metal and plasma expanding into the void. I watched from the command center as 11 other council ships met similar fates across the solar system. The galaxy's peacekeepers, the enforcers of order, the beings who had looked down on humanity for generations, suddenly facing the nightmare they had created by pushing us too far. We weren't fighting with their rules anymore. We were writing new ones in fire and steel. The council had always wondered what made humans different, what strange quirk of evolution made us so unpredictable, so volatile, so dangerous. That morning they learned the answer. We were the species that turned suffering into fuel, that built weapons from our wounds, that looked at impossible odds and decided to make history anyway. And as Titanbreaker took its first steps toward the council fleet gathering in high orbit, I knew with absolute certainty that the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The peace was over. The reckoning had begun. The council's response fleet arrived within 6 hours, an armada of 2,000 vessels that blotted out the sun over Mars like a mechanical eclipse. They came with the confidence of gods who had never been challenged, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of 100 conquered worlds. Admiral Theron Vec commanded the fleet from the dreadnought Eternal Sovereignty, a ship so massive it had its own gravitational field. He broadcast his ultimatum on every frequency, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Primitive constructs of Earth, you have committed an act of unprecedented aggression. Surrender your mechanized units and your species will be granted clemency. Resist, and we will demonstrate why the Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years. In the cockpit of Titanbreaker, Gemma Cross laughed until tears streamed down her face. Through the neural link, I felt the echo of her amusement mixed with something darker, something that tasted like copper and felt like lightning. She opened a channel directly to the Eternal Sovereignty, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Admiral Vec, let me tell you about human history. We've been killing each other for sport since before your council existed. We turned warfare into an art form, perfected it across 10,000 years of blood and fire. You think your 1,000-year peace means you understand violence? You've forgotten what it looks like. Let me remind you. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries, though the Council would try desperately to suppress the footage. 12 war giants scattered across the solar system moved as one coordinated force with a precision that suggested months of practice. In reality, most pilots had never operated their machines in combat before that moment, but humanity had spent those 15 years not just building weapons, but developing tactics that exploited every weakness in Council military doctrine. The Council fleet opened fire with enough ordnance to crack a moon. Plasma waves, kinetic missiles, particle beams, gravitational disruptors, all converging on positions where the war giants had been standing milliseconds before. But Gemma and her fellow pilots had already moved, using maneuvering thrusters that pushed forces that would have liquefied unaugmented humans. The neural link allowed them to react faster than thought, their bodies becoming one with machines that treated physics as a suggestion. Rather than a law, Titanbreaker closed the distance to the Council's forward line with bursts of acceleration that left ionized trails across the Martian sky. Gemma deployed the war giants' close combat weapons, massive blades forged from materials that shouldn't exist according to Council science. Humanity had discovered them in the deep crust of Europa, crystalline structures that held edges at the molecular level and never dulled. We called them Reaper blades, and they carved through Council ship hulls like wire through clay. The first destroyer Gemma reached tried to retreat, its engines flaring desperately as it recognized the threat. Too slow, too late. Titan breakers' blades swept through the vessel lengthwise, splitting it into sections that tumbled apart in eerie silence. Inside those sections, crew members died instantly as atmosphere vented and systems failed. Gemma felt nothing through the neural link but savage satisfaction. Across the battlefield, Jackson Mercer in Wrathborn demonstrated why humanity had always excelled at improvised violence. His war giant grabbed a Council frigate with both hands and used it as a club to batter 3 other ships into scrap metal. When the frigate finally broke apart, Jackson simply grabbed another one and kept swinging. It was brutal, inelegant, and absolutely terrifying to beings who fought wars with calculated precision and minimal risk. But the Council had numbers, and they adapted quickly. Admiral Vec reorganized his fleet into a spherical formation, designed to bring maximum firepower to bear from all angles simultaneously. He targeted Yuki Tanaka in Storm Herald, concentrating fire from 300 ships on a single point. For a moment it seemed like they had found the answer. Storm Herald's shields blazed white-hot, energy readings spiking into critical ranges. Then Yuki did something that made my heart stop in the command center. She shut down the shields entirely, diverting all power to weapons and engines. The neural link allowed her to calculate trajectories faster than any computer, weaving Storm Herald through incoming fire with movements that defied belief. She wasn't dodging based on where the shots were. She was predicting where they would be based on minute variations in enemy ship positioning. And while the Council fleet focused on trying to hit her, Yuki fired Storm Herald's primary weapon for the first time. We called it the Cascade Cannon, a device that created a chain reaction in ship power cores at range. One shot at the nearest Council destroyer, and its reactor went critical. The explosion triggered a sympathetic detonation in the ship next to it, then the next, then the next. In 15 seconds, Yuki had created a domino effect that destroyed 47 vessels. The Council fleet faltered. Not in their attack patterns, those remained mathematically perfect, but in something more fundamental. For the first time in millennia, beings who had never known true fear began to understand what it meant to face an enemy that wanted them dead not as a strategic objective, but as an act of pure retribution. Back on Earth, the satellite feeds showed crowds gathering in every major city. The people who had bowed to Council authority for 3 generations stood watching screens as their champions tore through an armada that had seemed invincible. I saw footage of an old man in Shanghai falling to his knees and weeping, a child in Sao Paulo pointing at the sky and laughing with pure joy, a woman in Moscow holding up a photo of her son, who had died in a Council labor camp, whispering prayers to God she hadn't believed in for years. Humanity was remembering what it felt like to be dangerous. Rafael Santos in Void, Render found himself surrounded by Council boarding craft attempting to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. These small attack ships carried elite troops designed to disable mechanized units from the inside. They swarmed Void Render like insects, cutting through armor with molecular saws and plasma torches. For 30 seconds, it looked like Raphael might be the first casualty of the war. Then he activated Void Render's self-defense system, something we had built based on ancient human naval tactics. Thousands of smaller drones deployed from hidden compartments across the war giant's hull, each one a flying bomb designed to seek heat signatures and detonate. The Council boarding craft were wiped out in a cascading series of explosions that turned space around Void Render into a sphere of fire. Raphael's voice came over the command channel, breathing hard but alive. "Command, this is Void Render. All hostiles neutralized, armor integrity at 60%. Weapons fully operational. Send me more targets." Admiral Vec made his final mistake then. Enraged by losses he had never imagined possible, he ordered the Eternal Sovereignty forward into direct engagement range. The Dreadnought was a fortress in space, bristling with enough firepower to fight an entire fleet alone. Its shields could withstand a supernova. Its armor had been forged in the heart of a neutron star. It was the ultimate expression of Council technological superiority. Gemma saw it coming and smiled that terrible smile again. "All units converge on the Dreadnought. Time to teach the Council why you don't bring a fortress to a knife fight." 12 war giants, battered and scarred but still operational, turned as one toward the Eternal Sovereignty. The Council's flagship stood alone in space, confident in its invincibility. and humanity's children of war and rage came for it like wolves who had finally cornered the shepherd. The real battle was about to begin. The eternal sovereignty hung in space like a monument to arrogance, its weapons systems charging with enough power to glass entire continents. Admiral Vec believed in the mathematics of warfare, in the cold certainty that superior technology would always defeat inferior forces. He had studied human history and dismissed it as the primitive flailing of a species too emotional to understand true military doctrine. As 12 war giants closed the distance to his flagship, he prepared to teach humanity its final lesson in humility. He never understood that humans don't fight to win according to someone else's rules. We fight to survive, and survival has no mathematics, no clean equations, only the raw will to see another sunrise. Gemma Cross felt Titan Breaker's damaged systems struggling to maintain cohesion. The neural link was sending pain signals through her spine, warnings that the machine was operating beyond safe parameters. But safe had stopped mattering the moment Earth decided to stop being a victim. She pushed Titan Breaker harder, feeling the war giant respond like a wounded animal finding strength it didn't know it possessed. The other pilots reported similar damage. Jackson Mercer's Wrathborn had lost its left arm in a missile barrage. Yuki Tanaka's Storm Herald was venting atmosphere from a hull breach that exposed 3 decks to vacuum. Rafael Santos could barely see through Void Render's cracked viewport, piloting half-blind through instruments and instinct. They were all dying by degrees, machines and pilots bleeding together through connections that made it impossible to tell where human ended and metal began. But they kept coming. The Eternal Sovereignty opened fire with its primary batteries, weapons designed to destroy capital ships in single volleys. The first shot vaporized a Council cruiser that had drifted into the line of fire, erasing it from existence in a flash of light bright enough to be seen from Earth. The second shot caught Jackson's Wrathborn center mass, and for a terrible moment I thought we had lost him. Then, through the dissipating energy bloom, Wrathborn emerged, still moving, still fighting. Jackson's voice came through the comm system, rough with pain but carrying something that sounded like laughter. "Is that all you've got?" My grandmother hit harder than that, and she was 94 when the Council took her pension. He wasn't bragging. The war giants had been built with one purpose: to withstand anything the Council could throw at them and hit back twice as hard. We had studied their weapons for 15 years, calculated every possible attack vector, designed countermeasures that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Humanity had bet everything on these 12 machines, and they were not going to let us down. Gemma coordinated the attack with thoughts faster than words. The neural link didn't just connect pilot to machine. It created a web between all 12 war giants, allowing them to move as a single coordinated entity. They spread out in a pattern that looked random, but was actually designed to exploit blind spots in the Eternal Sovereignty's defensive grid, gaps that existed for microseconds between weapon cycles. The dreadnought shields blazed as the war giants opened fire simultaneously. 12 different weapon systems targeting 12 different weak points. Energy shields were designed to distribute damage evenly across their surface, to turn concentrated attacks into manageable heat dispersion. But the war giants weren't just hitting the shields. They were hitting them with precisely calculated timing that created resonance cascades, turning the shield's own strength against them. Physics is beautiful when you understand it well enough to make it scream. The Eternal Sovereignty's shields collapsed in sections, failing faster than backup systems could compensate. Admiral Vec's voice cut across all frequencies, no longer commanding but pleading. "All units, protect the flagship. Repeat, all units converge on our position." But there were no units left to answer. The Council fleet had been shattered, scattered across the solar system in debris fields that would take decades to clear. Some ships fled toward the outer system, broadcasting surrender codes that humanity had no interest in acknowledging. Others simply stopped fighting, crews abandoning their posts to stare at tactical displays that showed the impossible happening in real time. 12 war giants against a dreadnought that outmassed them 1,000 to 1. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it became a lesson in why humanity had always been dangerous, not because we were stronger or smarter, but because we understood something the Council had forgotten in their millennia of comfortable superiority. Desperation breeds innovation, and rage fuels miracles. Yuki's Storm Herald fired its cascade cannon one final time, the weapon burning out from overuse but delivering its payload directly into the Eternal Sovereignty's exposed reactor core. The chain reaction started deep in the dreadnought's heart, energy cascading through systems that had been built to be indestructible. For 5 seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then the eternal sovereignty began to come apart from the inside, sections bulging outward as internal explosions sought escape routes through collapsing bulkheads. Admiral Vec had time for one last transmission, his synthetic voice finally carrying something that sounded like emotion. Impossible. We are the Council. We are eternal. We cannot fall to primitives who barely understand faster than light travel. Gemma answered him, her voice carrying across the void to every remaining Council ship, to every human settlement in the solar system, to Earth itself where billions watched and wept and cheered. You're right about one thing, Admiral. You can't fall to primitives. But we're not primitive anymore. We're just better at being human than you ever were at being gods. The eternal sovereignty exploded in a sphere of light that briefly outshone Mars itself, a second sun born from the death of tyranny. When the glare faded, 12 war giants hung in space, damaged and scarred but still standing, still ready to fight if any Council ship wanted to continue the lesson. None did. The remaining Council vessels jumped to faster than light speeds without waiting for orders, fleeing back to the core worlds with sensor logs that would make their superiors question everything they believed about humanity. We had done more than win a battle. We had shattered the myth of Council invincibility, proved that their 10,000 years of peace had been built on the backs of species too afraid to challenge them. In the cockpit of Titan Breaker, Gemma Cross began the shutdown sequence, feeling the neural link disconnect with a sensation like waking from the most vivid dream of her life. Her body was broken. Bones cracked from acceleration forces, neural pathways burned from feedback that would take months to heal. But she was smiling, and through the viewport, she could see Earth hanging in the distance, beautiful and blue, and finally, truly free. I watched from the command center as all 12 pilots emerged from their war giants, supported by medical teams but walking on their own power. They had given everything, sacrificed parts of themselves that could never be recovered. But they had won something more precious than their own lives. They had won the right for humanity to stand tall in a galaxy that had tried to make us kneel. That night, every human settlement in the solar system lit beacons in celebration. From the mines of Mercury to the orbital stations beyond Pluto, humanity burned lights against the darkness and sang songs that spoke of freedom, defiance, and the unbreakable spirit that had carried us from caves to the stars. Children who had grown up under Council rule learned for the first time what it meant to be human without apology, without shame, without fear. The Council would return someday. We all knew that. They would come with bigger fleets, better weapons, more calculated strategies. But they would never again look at humanity and see primitives to be managed. They would see the species that built giants from rage and righteousness. The beings who turned suffering into strength and emerged from the fire harder than anything the galaxy had ever faced. And somewhere in the depths of space, in workshops and foundries hidden across a dozen worlds, humanity was already building the next generation of war giants, bigger, faster, more powerful than before, because we had learned the most important lesson of all. The galaxy respects only strength, and humanity had finally remembered how to be strong. The war was over, but our story was just beginning.